All right, we're going to analyze a student argument. Sometimes a person may need to be untruthful. When considering difficult situations that arise in our personal lives, being completely truthful can give our opponent more power to manipulate us. When there is no way of being silent about our finances, relationships, or other personal facts, a person will be better off lying instead of telling the truth. Okay, interesting thoughts here. I want to formalize this argument, though. I want you to state it formally. That is numbered premises followed by a conclusion. In this one, our conclusion is stated in the first sentence. Sometimes a person may need to be untruthful. And then premises follow. So, and actually, two different lines of thought are present in each of these sentences. And I want to deal with each of them individually because I think they lend themselves to different arguments. The first one says, well, they could be related. You might see them as variations on the same thing. But the first one says this: being truthful can give our opponent more power to manipulate us. Let me just start with that for a second. Total honesty can give our opponent more power to manipulate us. Therefore, we're not always morally required to be totally honest. Right? As it stands, that's not valid. Right? Because there's no contradiction in saying yes, total honesty gives your opponent more power to manipulate you. And you ought to be totally honest at whatever cost, no matter, even if it does. Right? So premise one by itself won't do the work. What we also need, if we want this conclusion to follow, is a premise that says we're not morally required to give our opponent power to manipulate us. Total honesty will give our opponent more power to manipulate us. Therefore, we're not always morally required to be totally honest. That's what the author wanted to say. So you need that second premise in order to make the argument valid. To see the logic here, I mean, you could have done this with the modus ponens magic trick, right? And so I could have said, if total honesty gives our opponent power to manipulate us, then total honesty isn't required. And we would have gotten the same work done. So now this argument is valid, and we can ask interesting questions about whether the premises are true, because they may or may not be true. That's what we want to ask. Here's another line of argument from that second sentence from the initial paragraph. When there's no way of being silent about our finances, relationships, or other personal facts, a person will be better off lying instead of telling the truth. All right, let me kind of blow that. I think the key thought there is about sometimes it's in your best interest to lie, right? Sometimes a person will be better off lying than telling the truth. And the conclusion that we're supposed to draw is, well, what is it? What's the unstated conclusion? The unstated conclusion here is that sometimes it's permissible to lie. So here's what we've got. We've got a premise and we've got a conclusion. That's not valid so far. Use the modus ponens magic trick and you tell me, what premise do we need to add in order to make this a valid argument? Modus ponens magic trick tells us, yes. Here's what we got. Sometimes a person will be better off telling the truth than lying. Sometimes a person will be better off lying than telling the truth. Well, if a person's better off lying than telling the truth, then it's permissible to lie. Therefore, sometimes it's permissible to lie. Now, when we put it that way, when we spell it out in those kind of, bold terms, do you really believe premise two? I mean, look at that. If a person's better off lying than telling the truth, then you can lie. Great. So, I mean, I did rob the bank, but it would be a lot better for me if, nobody knew that. So I'm going to lie and tell them, no, I did not. Or yes, I did eat the last piece of pie, but you're going to be super mad at me if I admit that to you. So I'm just going to lie to you. Or, I mean, can you just lie? Everybody who lies thinks it's in their own best interest, and a lot of times they're right. Does that make all lies are permissible? Here's my point. This argument is valid. It's logically valid. It may be sound, but there's a lot of interesting objections you could raise about it, especially that second premise at this point. All right, so that's the value of formalizing these arguments. We can see more clearly where we might want to make objections.